So today we will build a patch from scratch, experimenting with a few techniques with VCAs. I want to quickly mention that I just published a new course all about VCAs in the modular environment. So what they are and how to use them. Of course, if you are interested, links in the description. But this is the setup I have here today. As always, I will be using Clocked from Impromptu, and I have the Mind Meld mixer setup with a send reverb with plateau, and I will use also color coding with the cable color key from Inklen. And let's start with a simple 8-step sequence with the ADDR sequencer from Bog Audio. Right, we will clock it with a clock multiplied by 2, so we get 8 notes, and we will go with something like, let's say, 105 BPM. Right, for now I will use also the reset just in case. Right, and we will use the Befaco Pony VCO as our voice and also a quantizer to quantize the signal coming from the ADDR sequencer. Right, so pitch information will be yellow. This will go to the quantizer, from the quantizer to the volt per octave input, and then with the red cable, audio cable, this will go to the mixer. Right, just like this, and now I can set a sequence. Right, so we have a very repetitive 8-step sequence. Can already add some reverb to this. Again, I have plateau as a send reverb. So this will be channel 1, very nice. Right, so again, it's a very repetitive 8-step sequence, which is totally okay, but we can add some variation to it with a VCA. So what we will do, we will add the VCA before the quantizer. So again, the pitch in this case will go through the VCA and then back to the quantizer. And now when I change the levels on the VCA, the amplitude of the sequence will change, and this will create variation. Right? Something like this. Right, and for this, for making this change, we can use another sequencer, for example, that will run slower and will add variation. So let's use another ADDR sequencer. In this case, I will use a divided by 4 clock. So this will line up with the sequence we already have. Again, I will use the clock, which is a blue cable, and the reset and reset everything. So now basically with each cycle, if you pay attention, with each cycle of the first ADDR, the second ADDR here will move 1 step. Again, we have here multiplied by 2. Here we have divided by 4, which will give us 8 basically. So for the 8 steps, for each 8 steps, we get 1 new cycle here. Right, so now this ADDR will control the VCA. Something important to make sure is that the range of this ADDR sequencer is enough. The VCA will work with 0 to positive 10 volts. Right, so here in the right click menu, I can change the range to 0 to positive 10. Right, and now let's do something like this. Let's have the first 3 steps all the way up. So this is the original sequence. The VCA will open fully, and then some variation, and then 3 steps opened fully, and then again some variation. Right, so we have 3 steps, 3 cycles of the same sequence, 1 variation, 3 more cycles, and a different variation. Right, and all of this with the so-called simple VCA. Let's add a bit more variation to the timbre, to the sound itself. So for this we will use an envelope. Right, I would like to gate it with probability. So in this case, we will use chances from Count Modular. If you want to try this in hardware, you can use something like Flip from After Later Audio, right, to add probability to gates or to triggers, right, or you can use just a simple sample and hold module in this case, but I will use chances and I will use the same clock multiplication. This will gate the envelope, and the envelope will control the timbre of the Pony VCO. Right now, the timbre CV input, this control has no dedicated attenuation, so also here we can just use another VCA to attenuate this modulation. Right, so I will send this through a VCA and then take it down, change the envelope a bit. Right, and I can set exactly the modulation amount. Right, let's add quickly also delay to this with Prince of Perception from Flag. Right, the voice will go through this delay, sync it with the clock, change the delay time maybe to dotted eighths. Right, maybe add some filtering, something like this. Right, so we have a nice voice. Let's mute this and work on another voice. Now this one will be a bit more percussive. So let's start with Neoni from Instruo and the VCV wavetable VCO, and we will use AM or Amplitude Modulation to create something a bit more percussive and metallic. So for this, let's use another VCA. The wavetable VCO will go through the VCA to the mixer, right? And then the fold output of Neoni, which is a wave folder, sine wave or triangle wave, will go and will modulate the VCA at audio rates, right? And this will give us this amplitude modulation sound, or this AM sound, right? But first of all, you could already see the VCA opens only about to 50%, and that's because in most cases an oscillator will output a bipolar signal that will fluctuate somewhere between negative and positive 5 volts. We can see this also on the scope actually, right? So this will be the output from Neoni, right? You can see it's a bipolar signal, and the VCA voltage controlled attenuator or amplifier will ignore everything below 0, so we just get half of the signal. But for this we can offset Neoni. There are many ways we can do this also in hardware. In our case we will use the VCV CV mix, right? We will send Neoni through this to the scope and also to the VCA, right? And now if I open the first channel all the way, we get basically the same result, but with the second channel we can offset this signal, make it unipolar, and now the VCA will open all the way up and we get the full range. And now the ratio between the pitch of both VCOs, of both oscillators, will dictate the timbre we get. The wave shape also, again, we can add some wave folding. Right, and later on we will fine tune this. Right, so now let's get rid of the scope, send this voice through another VCA. Again, we want this to be percussive. Right, so this will go through another VCA and use an envelope to control this VCA. Right, and let's use in this case a Euclidean sequencer to sequence this voice. So I will use the one from Count Modular, which will look like this. We will clock it with a clock multiplied by 4. So in this case we get 16th notes. Right, use also the reset later on and use the gates to gate the envelope. Right, let's set the envelope to something more snappy. So attack all the way down, sustain all the way down, release all the way down. And now we have here something a bit more snappy. Right, and let's go with a length of 14 steps. But within these 14 steps, we'll have only 5 hits. Right, so this will be the rhythm. Reset everything. Right, let's bring back the first voice. Maybe take it in level a bit down. Right, something like this. Right, and now let's try and find a nice ratio between them, so it will be a nice metallic percussive voice. Something like this maybe. Right, we can add movement with oct, also from instru, basically a few LFOs here. So let's have some movement to the wave folding here on the ONI, and also to the position of the wavetable oscillator, and maybe also to the decay. Right, something like this. Of course, you can continue to fine-tune this voice if you want. But now what I want is to add a bit more variation by adding another layer to this sound and sending it to a delay and reverb, but only on certain steps, only at certain times. So for this, again, we will use a VCA. I will send a copy of this percussive voice, right, to the second VCA. Again, audio is red. And use an envelope to open this VCA or to control this VCA, right, and send this through a delay and reverb. In this case, we will use Chronoblob 2 and Plateau, of course, right, and I would like to use the Chronoblob 2 as a ping-pong delay, so in this case, we will have to use the right input, otherwise it will be normalized. But if you send this to the right input and change this to a ping-pong delay, now we will get the result we want. So from there it will go to the reverb and then to the mixer. Right, and now something important is to set the delay to 100% wet, because we already have the dry signal and we are using a copy of this signal. So we don't want the dry signal once, so the delay will go and will be 100% wet. Let's sync this also with the clock we are using. Right, and now we can use various gate sources to gate this envelope and to open the VCA. Right, in our case, let's use another Euclidean sequencer, so I will just duplicate what I already have. We will use the same clock and reset. I'm just holding control and dragging the cables. Right, but in this case, let's have a length of 21 steps. Right, and within those 21 steps, we'll have only 2 hits. This will go and gate the envelope. Let's solo this for a second. Right, so now only when the second Euclidean sequencer is opening the VCA and there is actually a voice coming through, only then this voice, this metallic voice, a percussive voice, will go through the delay and reverb. Right, so let's have a bit more feedback. Maybe add lots of reverb, take the lows a bit down, no need for modulation in this case. Right, something like this. You can listen to it with the original voice. Right, so now we have another layer with the delay and reverb, but again, only on certain steps, only when both sequencers meet. Okay, let's mute everything and work on a bass voice. We will use 2 VCV VCOs, right, and we will crossfade between them with using 2 VCAs, 1 and 2. Once we will have a saw wave, once we will have a square wave or a pulse wave, and for crossfading between them, we will use an LFO, again, just the VCV LFO. Once we will use a sine wave to control the first VCA. Again, we'll have to change this to be unipolar, so it will have the full range. As you can see now, it's not opening all the way. When I change this to be unipolar, it will open from 0 to +10. Right? And now we will need an inverted version of this LFO to control the other VCA. So for this, we will use the Befaco and Molten Modular Motion meter. Right, the LFO, a copy of this sine wave, will go to the first channel, and then from the third channel, you see it's written here mix. This will go and control the second VCA. The first channel will be set to CV invert, so we can invert this LFO, open it all the way. Now you see we have the negative version of it. But again, this VCA and most VCAs will not work with negative voltages, so we have to offset this, and this we can do with the second channel, which will add 10 volts. As you can see, it's written here. And since we are using the mix output, they will be mixed, and we will have the inverted version of this LFO. Right, so now basically we crossfade between the two VCOs, and we can mix them with a simple mixer, right? So we have once the first VCA, the saw wave, once the second VCA, the square wave, and let's have a listen to this. Right, and with the LFO, we change the rate. Let's send this already through a low pass filter. Again, I will use the one from VCV. Add some resonance, some drive. Right, and let's set the saw wave to an octave down. Now by default, the VCO will be tuned to C4. So if I right click the frequency knob and I enter C3, this will basically be an octave down. And let's take the square wave 2 octaves down. So again, by default it's C4. So if I enter C2, it will be, oh yeah, 2 octaves down. Right, and now let's change the frequency of the LFO. Let's bring it up quite a bit to audio rate and have another effect. Oh yes. So we get this gnarly sound. Right, we can add some chorus to this as well with the chorus from Flag. Right, just to add more weight to it. Let's take the mix for a second all the way up. Add some drive. Take the low frequencies a bit down or out. Add some spread, so the delay time. Add some depth, modulation depth. Something like this. Can add some reverb to it and add modulation to the cutoff of the filter, again with oct that we already have here. Right, now I want some changes in pitch also for this bass voice, so for this we can use the bass module from Sively. Basically it will take pitch information and will make sure to output the range of the bass voice. So we will use the pitch from the quantizer, right? I just take a copy of it to the CV input. From there it will go to both oscillators 1 and 2, but also to the FM input of the LFO and open the attenuverter all the way. So also this audio rate modulation, it will also move together with the oscillators. Right, but now I'm going to use the same clock division to gate this module, to gate this pitch information, so there is not so much movement. Right, the same divided by 4. Right? If you want to do this in hardware, by the way, you can try using track and hold, for example, or actually even another VCA. You can also use a VCA to gate signals. Right, so we have some movement in the bass. And now let's use a VCA as AND logic. So what I will do, first of all, let's mute all of the voices. Right, and now I will use Tremor 2 as a kick drum voice. And I would like this kick drum to play only when both Euclidean sequencers play at the same time. So one and the other. Of course, we can use Boolean logic for this, but we can also use a VCA. So we will use one gate from one sequencer. This will go through the VCA to tremor 2 to gate tremor 2. So now we get the first sequence, but the other sequence, the other Euclidean sequencer, again, I'm doing this, other Euclidean sequencer will go to the CV input of the VCA. Again, one goes through the VCA, one to the CV input of the VCA. So only when both are high, tremor 2 will be triggered. Right, again, only when both are high. So let's have the attack a bit up of tremor 2. The oscillator section, more decay, a bit of wave shaping here. Let's add also some noise, add decay. There's a built-in comp filter here on the noise, so the comp will go all the way left, pitch all the way left, so it's nice and long, tone a bit up. Right, something like this. Let's use another delay, another Prince of Perception to add more movement to this one. Right, so again, sync this with the clock. Something like this. There is also ducking here, so we can duck the delay with the kick signal. Add some filtering, more feedback. If we reverse this, let's see what happens. Add some reverb. Take the bass a bit down in level. Right, we can use Oct to pan this voice. Right. So you can see how many things you can do with the VCA, adding variation to sequences, amplitude modulation, crossfading, end logic, and there are many more techniques and ideas. Again, if you're interested, have a look at the course I prepared. Thank you for watching. Cheers.